Welcome to Gracefully Graying Livestream. Gracefully Graying is a startup to connect you to resources and information about growing older and for assisting your loved ones. We provide articles, interviews, checklists, and other tips to create a productive and vibrant life. We also have many resources for people moving into later life stages and how they can be helped by those around them. You can find us on gracefullygraying.com and social media platforms. So now enjoy the live stream Gracefully Graying show.
Welcome. I am your host and co-founder of Gracefully Graying, attorney Henry Gornbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Peter Lichtenberg, the director of the Institute of Gerontology and Merrill Palmer Institute at Wayne State University, as we discuss and explore this very critical topic of financial exploitation of those of us who are gracefully graying. And I might add, Peter, before we start, is that yesterday there was a scam that was perpetrated on attorneys where I got a phone message saying I have to call this number immediately regarding something of my bar. And I immediately called the State Bar of Michigan. They said their phones were ringing off the hook because someone was trying to scam attorneys throughout Michigan. So, Peter, welcome to this timely and very important topic.
Thank you so much for having me, Henry.
Peter, tell us a little bit about your background and position at the Institute of Gerontology at Wayne State University.
Henry, I've been a specialist in working with older adults as a clinical psychologist, geriatric neuropsychologist for 36 years. And for the last 22 years, after spending the first 14 years in medical practices and working with patients mostly and doing research, I've been the director of the Institute of Gerontology at Wayne State University, which is an interdisciplinary research institute really dedicated to aging and health, and taking research and translating it so that the public can find it useful and we can improve things.
What is the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act that took effect in Michigan in late September of 2021?
So this act was many years in coming. You have to give great credit to the Attorney General of Michigan and the Attorney General's Elder Abuse Task Force for crafting and helping pass this legislation and explaining it to legislators on both sides of the aisle so they understood how important it was, and negotiating actually with the financial services industry, because this Financial Exploitation Prevention Act does two main things. It makes financial professionals, the banks, money service businesses, it makes them mandatory reporters of financial exploitation, and it also gives them the power to delay or hold funds if they feel like somebody is in the midst of a scam or exploitation.
Well, tell us about some of the other key provisions from your perspective.
Well, that's huge, because before, banks would refer to, or credit unions, they would refer to adult protective services, but they really felt like they had no legal standing to delay processing funds. And now they do, and they have the legal authority to delay processing funds until after Adult Protective Services has investigated the matter. And Adult Protective Services is a social service agency found in every state. Ours is in the Department of Health and Human Services, and it investigates all suspected elder abuse cases, including financial exploitation.
So far, what has been the effect of this legislation from your perspective, Peter?
Well, two things have happened. One, both are good. The first is that Adult Protective Services has received about 3 times the number of reports of suspected exploitation from banks and credit unions since this bill went into effect. Now, we still have a way to go in terms of documenting those suspected cases, because less than half end up getting investigated. The second thing that has happened is a partnership that I've been able to have now due to the creativity and leadership of Karma Peters at the Michigan Legacy Credit Union, where they are working with us and our group on giving their members an opportunity to explore their own financial vulnerability.
Now, how is this legislation being enforced to date?
I don't know that there's been to date much of an enforcement act or effort, because it's very hard to do that. I mean, how would you know who didn't get reported? But I think what we're seeing is a great deal of education and outreach from all kinds of providers. You know, that elder abuse task force for the Michigan Attorney General's office has about 100 members, and with their subcommittees and all of us are involved in some type of outreach or another. And the Attorney General's office itself does a lot of educating of financial institutions. So, it keeps getting out there more and more.
Tell us how the Act is tied into the work that you are doing.
So, the current work that we're doing, we have several things going as always, but one is a planning grant, because we believe that financial health is integral to mental and physical health in older age. And so we have started working with 3 different entities, a medical practice, outpatient, senior living facility, and now Michigan Legacy Credit Union, to give the opportunity to assess the vulnerability that their members or patients have to financial exploitation. And so we're finding that this can really be a terrific way of uncovering the risk that people have. And now we're starting to think about, well, okay, once we've uncovered that risk, what do we do about it? But one thing I want to say, Henry, is that everyone, including attorneys, are vulnerable to financial exploitation and scams under the right circumstances at the right point in time and so forth. And these scammers are very sophisticated and very good. However, some people are considerably more vulnerable. And that's what our scale really is able to do, find out who is more vulnerable and what are those vulnerabilities.
Peter, tell us a little bit more about your partnership with the Michigan Legacy Credit Union.
This was a wonderful partnership. It started out with our doing 4 different 1-hour trainings with all of Michigan Legacy Credit Union employees. And so we covered several things. One, such as what are the signs of early dementia, how to recognize that, how does that impact financial abilities, how to understand financial vulnerability and the vulnerability to scams. Another thing that we did was how to have difficult conversations, and why are conversations about finances and financial autonomy so touchy and so difficult, and what constitutes informed decision making, and what questions, because the credit union employees in their policy and procedures manual are supposed to ask further questions of a member who they are worried about the financial decisions that the person's making, whether those are indeed exploitation. But what questions should they ask? Well, we gave them a set of questions to ask, Henry. So it started with those 4 trainings, and then Karma Peters reached out to her members and new members as they come on, to offer them the opportunity to fill out our scale. And she asked some follow-up questions. We learned some really important things. First, sorry, Henry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm listening.
I don't mean to be monologuing.
So basically, this is, as I've told you before, I've been an alleged victim of several attempts at scams, so this is close to home. So go ahead, please.
Well, the first thing that we found is that there's a lot of vulnerability in each of the settings that I described: medical setting, senior living, and members of the credit union. And that vulnerability, people who had been exploited had 13 of the 14 people who had been exploited had higher than normal vulnerability on our scale. The other thing that differentiated them was that almost everybody who was not a victim had a financial plan in place for how to protect their finances, but less than a third of those who were victims had that financial plan in place. And so we can start to see that there's a real pattern here about vulnerability and how we might think about moving towards prevention.
Peter, what are some other partnerships that you have to prevent financial exploitation of older adults?
We have several. Thank you. We have the SAFE program, which actually not only does a ton of community presentations. Our director and social worker, Latoya Hall, who is a superstar out in the field. She has a background in financial coaching. She does a lot of community education, helping to prevent exploitation, but she also provides one-on-one services at no charge for people who have been the victims of identity theft or scams and can't seem to get their finances back in order. Latoya will work one-on-one as many sessions as it takes in order to make the proper reports and try to get monies back and try to clear up credit problems. That's one partnership that we have. We partner with Michigan Adult Protective Services across the state, and they use our 10-item informed decision-making screening scale on all cases of financial exploitation that involved a specific decision. Obviously, a scam does, because you're giving money to a scammer for a particular reason, but maybe it's making a purchase or giving a gift or allowing someone else access to your money. So those decisions, we help APS investigate those, because not having informed decision-making abilities, i.e. not having decisional capacity, goes hand in hand with huge risk for exploitation and many cases of exploitation.
Peter, when we're talking about older adults, what age range are you referring to?
We do 60 and over, Henry, and it's not that age 60 is that old, but when you get into looking at health disparities, we see that lots of people of lower income are not going to live much beyond their mid-70s. And so 60 can look like 80, can look like 75 with a number of chronic diseases and the impacts that those have. So we do 60 and older. And but most of our SAFE clients, for example, are in their 70s or 80s.
Next, tell us about the two new published papers on financial exploitation risk factors that you have done.
Happy to do that. We continue to do research all the time. One of the things that differentiates our programs from many across the country who are doing great work in similar to our SAFE program, for example, with scam and identity theft victims, is they're not academics, so they don't collect data and publish results. And in our financial stressors and resources paper, which I think is a really excellent paper, we are comparing people who've been victims of financial exploitation with people who are not victims. And we're trying to see on financial measures, financial hassles, financial vulnerability, our scale, financial literacy, the intellectual aspects of understanding money. What were the best predictors of who was exploited, who wasn't? And it turned out there were two predictors, and they were totally independent and separate from each other. and that was financial literacy and our scale, the Financial Vulnerability Survey. And so those two predictors say, decision making and risk for exploitation is both knowledge about money and sort of the psychological and social aspects of finances and the context within which people are dealing with money. So we're very excited about that paper.
What do you mean by financial literacy?
So financial literacy, and it's measured by three simple items. Henry, it's one of them goes like this. Suppose that you have $100 in the bank. You get 1% interest. Inflation that year is 2%. Do you end up with more money than you had the year before? Less money? Exactly the same? And there's three questions very similar to that. And so that's sort of knowing how money works, how things like inflation or investments work at a basic level. And it actually can be a very powerful tool. Those three items are used in the national survey, the Health and Retirement Study, for everybody that participates in that study. And that's the largest population-based representative sample of older people, 55 and older, in the country.
Next, tell us about your study on older African Americans and risk for financial exploitation.
Yeah, there's been very little work done on African Americans. Most of the national samples do not oversample for African Americans when looking at financial exploitation, and so there's just been very little done. We try to say, look, our group of African Americans comes from our urban setting, and so understand that. And we compared a group of 54 African Americans who'd been exploited with 54 who had not, to see what was the key differences between them. We looked at all kinds of measures, health measures, physical, cognitive health, emotional health, and it turned out that our financial exploitation vulnerability measure was the best predictor. But what I'll tell you, Henry, that was so interesting was that stress and was a very good predictor of our vulnerability measure. So stress, isolation, those kinds of things really play into vulnerability and the risk for exploitation.
How can people access your financial vulnerability survey? Give us a site, please.
Thank you so much. olderadultnestegg.com. olderadultnestegg.com. You can go on there. There's no charge for any of this, Henry, for our safe services for using our survey. If you go on the older adult landing page on Older Adult Nest Egg at the top, there'll be for professionals, for older adults, for friends and family. Go on the older adult landing page and you'll see a link to our financial vulnerability survey. Take you 5 to 10 minutes to fill it out. And then what it will do is it'll give you a report, what your risk score is, and some suggested next steps, as well as resources.
Peter, are there any prevalent scams that we should be aware of, not only online, but also from unscrupulous salespeople who prey on the elderly by phone or in person?
Yeah, older adults continue, there's different twists on these kinds of scams, but they continue to be targeted, particularly for 3 or 4 types of scams. One scam that's increasing, Henry, are romance scams with older adults. So very sophisticated scammers are finding out who's been widowed or lost a partner and targeting them, or finding out who has been alone for a while. So romance scams are on the increase, and it's amazing. It sounds crazy, right? I've got to send money to my new girlfriend who's stuck in Russia. She can't get home to Sweden because of some bureaucratic stuff, so she needs $5,000 to do it. And yet, in these scams, people get so caught up. And obviously that connection that's made at an emotional level, even because these scammers are very good, they won't, it takes a lot to help people understand they're being scammed, and you have to be very careful about how you do that. It's not just so simple. Another one, though, government imposter scams, and these are getting very, very sophisticated, including the fact that people are sometimes getting threatened with violence. See, scammers pick up a lot of personal information on social media, and they use that, and they will go ahead and do these government impersonation scams. One that's recent is from the Department of Justice. It says, "Hey, we want you to help us with these scammers, and so we need you to send us your information so that we can track them down and so forth." So Social Security, IRS impersonation, these are the big ones that older adults have often become victim to. The third one is tech scams. Someone flashes a sign on your computer that says your malware is about to destroy everything that you own. Call this 800-888 number. Give us $50. We'll fix it for you. What you're doing is you're giving them control of your computer, which gives them access. And if you keep any bank accounts or things like that on your computer, they can have access to it.
I told you this happened to me, and I ended up dealing with the bank. It was something where I went to a site that talked about classic cars. And since I'm old, I've always been fascinated by classic cars because I grew up in that era. And all of a sudden, they're blaring things on my computer, the same one I'm sitting at right now, and call this number. And it was for Apple Care. And it's an Apple computer. So I called. And someone led me through all these steps, and they told me what to do. And they said there are scams coming out of China. I think, no, it was actually Hong Kong. And then I was directed to someone at my bank, talked to this person, a woman at some length, again, very convincing, who said, you have to give money so we can trap these scammers. And of course, when I went to my bank, I said, this does not smell right. And it was not right. And interestingly enough, these people kept calling me for several hours saying, you've got to do this, you're in danger. And it's scary. And the other thing, I'm on a lot.
The immediacy and the fear tactics are huge in these scams. Thank you for pointing that out, Henry.
Well, the other thing is, my specialty is family law. And over the years, I've had several, especially women, who were victims of the Nigerian scam, where there was a lover. I had one client actually fly to London to meet with a lover who actually didn't exist, and others who spent many, many thousands for these lovers. And now what I'm finding, I play word games online. And now there are these people popping up, and you can tell they're not real. I mean, they're real faces, but they're scams.
Yep.
And they try and entice you to start communicating, and then ultimately they start asking for money. So it's just so prevalent and so dangerous. So I guess if anything we can take from this, Peter, is that anyone can be a victim. I don't care what your background is, how sophisticated you are. There are people out there trying to scam you. And the other thing I can pass on is that if you get a call from someone from the government, don't respond, because the government, whether it's the IRS, whether it's the Attorney General, everything's done in writing, not by phone calls. So are there some further comments that you'd like to share with us? Because it's such an important topic. And
a further comment I'd like to share is that our partners in Hillsdale County were sharing with us that there's a huge run on the gift card scams at Walmart. And so, in other words, the scammers are telling people, go buy gift cards and then send us the gift card. Go buy the gift cards, and then you'll be in good shape and you'll be protected. and those gift cards will help you avoid the scam. But what happens is, of course, they're taking the information straight from the gift cards as soon as you share it with them. So anybody asking you to do anything in gift cards is a huge red flag.
Well, it's interesting. This is another scam attempt that was attempted to perpetrate on me, where I got an email request from the head of the law firm and was saying, I need you to get me some gift cards. I'm tied up and can't do it today. Please do it. Of course, it was a scam.
Yes.
I mean, it's just, there's so much out there. It's really terrifying. And like, the beauty of the internet is we can communicate instantly with anyone all over the world, but it's a double-edged sword. And it's so dangerous, whether it's for scams or so many other aspects of our society. Before we sign off, Dr. Peter Lichtenberg, it's always a pleasure having you. Are there any other thoughts or comments that you would like to share before we sign off?
Our next step, Henry, is we really are thinking about how to do a prevention project and study. How can we prevent people from being exploited, whether it's primary prevention or secondary prevention? And I'll just leave people with this. It all starts with some conversation and planning. We don't talk about finances enough and how to protect our financial health. And that's where it all begins.
You know, there's a reason for that before we sign off. You know, in my practice, I ask these questions about finance. And what I found over the many years that I practiced family law is that most people live over their heads. So they have this very nice lifestyle, but they're often deeply in debt or living from credit card to credit card. So it's not what you want to believe, and perception is often not reality. So again, Dr. Peter Lichtenberg, I thank you so much for being our guest today on Gracefully Graying. And I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying.